Should we get started? All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for making the very wet, treacherous drive in today to be here in person. Really appreciate it. But now we get to be warm and entertained and hopefully educated for a good 55 minutes. We have a special guest joining us today, Andy Szybalski. I've known Andy for almost 10 years. He was actually on my, I was thinking about this on the drive in today. He was on my interview panel at Uber. I guess you gave me the thumbs up. I got in somehow. The double. I also remember that Andy's, he was the only person who had me get up on the whiteboard to sketch. And if you ever have a chance to ask Andy, he's got a very precise way of sketching on a whiteboard that he talks about, like how to really achieve good communication. Andy was an early designer at Google, and then he was at Uber, where he ran Rider for a while, and then he was the design founder for Uber Eats, taking that from 0 to 1. And since Uber, he's been working, he's had his own project, Cove AI, and he's here today to talk to us about the design material has changed. So please join me in welcoming Andy Szybalski to the stage.
Okay. Thanks, Zach, for the invite and for the intro, and really happy to be here with you all. I'm going to try to keep it fast-paced and entertaining, and I got a lot to talk about kind of how to do design with this new material that we all have access to now called LLMs. So Zach did some of my work for me in terms of intro here, but I'll just kind of add that I've spent my career sort of going a little bit straddling the worlds of engineering land and design land, and started out my career as my background's in computer science. Spent some time at Apple and working on a video game called Civilization 4. Spent some time, most of my career as a designer, and now at startup kind of get to have my hands in a little bit of everything. So Cove has been my baby since kind of the first commit. We all kind of code at the company, and so that I think is a relevant lens for this talk in terms of where I'm coming from. So founded Cove about 2 years ago. We're 8 people now. This is us all doing some biathlon in Utah. And I'll tell you more about Cove later. I have a son named Oliver. He's in 2nd grade. Here he is in some kind of outfit. I told him I was giving a talk today, and his advice to me was that I should start out with some jokes. Luckily, I'm not going to do that for you guys. But if anyone wants to hear any like 2nd grader jokes, you can come. I'll tell you some afterwards. But I do want to say something about kids, because I think that is a big part of my experiences in life and as a designer. When you give kids a new tool, they will think of some amazing things to do with it that you never thought of, that are kind of very rigid grown-up minds couldn't possibly comprehend, whether it's whatever the heck this outfit is or with technology. So I recently gave my son iPhone with like nothing but iMessage enabled, and he blew my mind the other day. So I was at the hospital. I had taken my mom to the hospital. She's fine, by the way. But and then Oliver texted me and said, "Oh, I heard Grandma's going to the hospital," and then he thumbs down his own text, and it blew my mind. Like, I've never ever thought of reacting to my own text. Like, is that a thing? Does anyone do that? Like, raise your hand if you've ever reacted to your own text. Okay, some people have done it. Okay, this is good. You creative thinking. I like it. But it's just funny, right? Like we all have these tools. We have the thumbs downs. Like, there's a new way to convey emotion of saying something and then reacting to your own text. Why did I never think of that? Like only a 7-year-old could have come up with that. And I think it's a good example because when LLMs first arrived, for most of us in tech, in some ways, even the people who built them, it was like an alien technology has suddenly beamed down, and we were poking at it with sticks, trying to figure out like, what the heck can this thing do? And I think today we've sort of evolved from the stage of monkeys poking with at alien technology to more like kids trying to imagine what you can do with this new material. But it's still a little bit magical. It's still a moving target in terms of exactly what you can do with it. And that's kind of the stage we're at, and we should embrace it. I think for me, one of my light bulb moments was when Nat Friedman posted on Twitter about his creation Natbot, where he hooked up GPT-3 to a browser, and he was showing how LLMs can browse the web, and that was just like, wow, you can build some really incredible things. This is not just a chatbot. It's not just a conversational UI. It's really a new type of material that you can build stuff out of. And so, given that we all have access to this new material, every material has a grain, every material have things that you can do with it. And how do we find the grain? How do we as designers figure out what are the capabilities of this new material? And that's the first half of what I want to talk about today. So my agenda today is two parts. The first is like, how do you, as a designer, work into your process the ways, how do you adapt your process to be better at figuring out what LLMs can do, using LLMs to build novel solutions to problems that maybe LLMs haven't been applied to before? Because I think that's a really exciting opportunity we all have right now. And then part two, I want to talk about kind of some of my own learnings and hypotheses from 2 years doing this myself. What do I feel like I've learned? Okay, so I want to tell a little story. So the other day I was talking to a designer at Google, and she was telling me about her process working with LLMs. And she said, well, Google research comes to me and hands me a piece of technology and a silver platter and says, hey, here's this new model, and here's the 8 things that it can do. And then I just build stuff using those 8 things. And it made me a little bit sad, because as designers, like, I don't think we should be waiting for somebody to hand us these capabilities on a silver platter and wait to be told what to do with this technology. So actually, if you only remember one thing from this talk, it's like, don't wait for someone else to tell you what it can do. Just like, play with it, right? And so the way that I do this is, a lot of the times I just start with a chat box. I'll just go to Claude or whatever. And if I have a problem that I want to solve, I'll just kind of start playing, start with a prompt really before I sketch anything or prototype anything. And so I just wanted to share a handful of examples of how I do this. So one thing that I've kind of, this sort of a little bit eclectic process that I've kind of evolved for myself is starting with the data model. So let's suppose that you are building a product to help people plan, choose a city to plan their event, right? So I'm gonna hold a conference. What city should I have this conference in? And so I might put into the Claude prompt box, like, give me a type for the vibes that I might care about when I'm selecting a city for a conference, right? And so the output is not the answer, the output is a type. And I might get something like this. Okay, so here's the data model for a city vibes, right? Like, okay, makes sense. Seems plausible. I'm not going to worry too much about getting into the weeds on this. And then I'll say, so this is your data model. And then I'll say, okay, now take this city and generate a vibe score for it using that type, right? And I pass this type back into it. And it says, okay, here is Honolulu, and it is laid back. It's not a tech hub. It's outdoorsy. It's medium academic, whatever. What's it best for? And then I'll say, okay, now take that data and build a UI out of it, and give me a bunch of variations, and I'll play with visual design or whatever. But that's a very quick way to see, like, okay, are LLMs any good at being a vibe picker for cities, right? And that took me like, a couple minutes, right? And then, when you do that, you've got your prompts, you've got your React component, you hand it all off, it's like ready to go in prod. You could launch that pretty much. So like, in terms of just like, what is plausible, what can you do with LM? I think that's like a kind of interesting process. And I find as a designer, like, designers often are natural prompt engineers. So we're good at kind of tweaking things, figuring stuff out about what you can do with the prompt that maybe your eng team might not come as naturally to them. Okay, so number 2 is like, starting with actual real data. So if you have data that you care about that you can MCP into, this is a great way to get started. So this is an example that I was playing with recently, where I had a database of business information, and I wanted to figure out what anomalies are in this database, right? Like where the data might not be reliable. And so I basically gave it a little very simple prompt being like, hey, you've got access to the data, search for anything that looks suspicious, that looks like the data might not be accurate. I gave it some very, very general guidance on what might be suspicious. And so it was able to output, and I said, like, output it in JSON format or something. I didn't even give it much, like, much guidance in terms of how to output it. And it did correctly detected, like, hey, there's a spike here. This could be a real spike, but it looks suspiciously large, so it might be the artifact of some data migration or kind of inaccuracy. And it totally worked. And then, I was able to again use that same process of kind of vibe coding something around it. And let's see, is this going to play? Got a mouse over here. And then I was able to prototype this sort of anomaly triage UI where, okay, you get a bunch of statistics from business, and then you have a queue where you need to annotate the data that it found and explain, like, okay, this was a data import issue. That's what the spike came from. Mark it as an anomaly. Or, this was another data import issue, or this one was actually correct. The spike was a real surge in orders. So interesting stuff you can do. One thing I like to think about a lot when I'm designing with LLMs is there something that was very, very hard to do like 5 years ago that's easy to do now, is translate between qualitative and quantitative, right? Whether it's filtering cities based on vibes or filtering, job applicants based on various qualifications or whatever. It's actually very easy now to say, here is a subjective question, and I want you to give me a number from one to 10 on the answer. And so you can kind of think about it if you're familiar with the concept of embeddings. It's basically you can take a concept like, grandmother and turn it into a vector, right? Or you can take the vector and turn it back into a concept like grandmother. And LMs are really good at this. Not even just using actual embeddings, but just using prompts. So you could say like kimchi, right? Like, what is kimchi as a vector? Like, give me a 1 to 10, 0 to 10 on each of these scales, and then also give a brief description. And then the inverse of that is, okay, I'm going to give you the vector of sweet, sour, spicy, bitter, umami, translate that into a list of foods that match that. And you can kind of do some interesting stuff with this, right? So this is just a little like thing I did for fun using Cove. So Cove is, I'll get into Cove more in a minute, but one of the things you can do in Cove is very quickly vibe code these little kind of one-off tools. And so this was like a flavor profile explorer where I put in kimchi, and it can kind of quantify the flavor profile of kimchi. And then I can also click around in that space and find other foods that have similar flavor profiles. So example, I want to say something that's like exactly like kimchi, except dial the spicy down to 0, and you end up with sauerkraut, right? So, and then you can draw a flavor profile of your own and see, okay, which things, this is a little bit of a weird example, but I'm not sure what Parmesan and chocolate have in common. Maybe it's just a sign that it doesn't work perfectly, but, or maybe there's some hidden meaning in here. What is umami? You can Google it. Umami is like savory taste.
It's life without it.
Yeah, it's gonna blow your mind. So another kind of thought here about a process is, I think about yourself when you're designing a prompt or designing something that uses LLMs. Think of yourself as the editor-in-chief of a publication, of a magazine, right? And pretend you are describing to a new writer or designer at your magazine, how do you create content that is on brand, that is going to do for the user what you want? And so I was for Cove, we were experimenting with kind of creating generative layouts for articles, and I was playing around with, like, how do you prompt it to have a certain brand visual identity that looks like Cove, right? And get it to consistently output those while having enough room to adapt the design, the layout based on the subject matter. And so I just started out with something kind of, rough, like, okay, clean Swiss design, no decorative fluff, systematic typography. And then here's the topic of the article I want you to create. But then I decided to have some fun. So I fed this prompt back into Claude and I'm like, take this prompt, but like dial it up to 11, just like go crazy, right? And then I got this, which was kind of fun. Like, you're part of a utopian modernist project to redesign humanity's knowledge infrastructure, right? Like, I love some of these little bits, like, ruthless reduction, it transcends cultural barriers. Clarity is a moral imperative. The grid is sacred. It's a crystalline vessel for knowledge transmission, right? So, I mean, it's a little bit silly, but you can have a lot of fun. I mean, your users never see any of this, but it's like, how do you impart to the LLM the types of values that you want to embody in the content that it's generating? And so, I was playing with this, and this is all still, by the way, just playing with Claude, right? I haven't even like used any other tools here yet. And so I did this, and I said, okay, apply this utopian modernist project to the topic of what to grow in my vegetable garden, right? And, like, here's what that looks like, very kind of, Swiss. And I also told it, this is kind of an interesting trick, is like, it can't really do like photo search or image generation in line, but what you can do is tell me what photos you would have put in there if you can. So just tell it like, hey, make boxes where the photos should be and include a prompt that could be used for either image search or image generation. Okay, last example of this before I switch gears. So generating momentum. I think this is something I think about a lot in terms of product design. I like for products to be exothermic. That's one of our goals with Cove, is it, you put in a small amount of energy and you get out a huge amount of energy in comparison, right? And one thing we also talk about is helping the user get unstuck in their thinking, right? And so does anyone recognize this? Show of hands. No, this is one person. Okay, cool. Yeah, I like you. So this is a deck of cards that Brian Eno, the music producer, published in the 70s, called Oblique Strategies. And the idea was, it's these set of almost like lateral thinking prompts, right? This is before LLMs had prompts, but these were creative prompts for humans. And I mean, some of them are a little bit metaphysical, right? Like, the most important thing is the thing most easily forgotten. Sounds like something like Yoda could say. But I kind of wanted to test out, okay, can you use these prompts? Can these prompts cause LLMs to think creatively in the same way they can cause humans to think more laterally, right? And so I was playing around with Claude and thinking about, okay, use this oblique strategy and apply it to this problem and fill in the blanks here. And I was also playing around with, like, can you dial it up or down, the lateralness of the thinking, by saying like, be pragmatic versus be unhinged, right? And so I said, okay, as a pragmatic thinker, use the oblique strategy, and I do a random choice from the deck, look at a very small object and look at its center. Suggest a creative solution to how my kid always wants to bring books to the breakfast table, but so that but then he gets distracted and doesn't eat. Oh no. Does someone want to tell me what a quote is? This got cut off, but I'm dying to know. So basically, what I told it to, anyone know? No, okay. I told it to like pick the first obvious answer and then discard it and come up with a better one, which is also another interesting way to kind of force the LLM to get a little bit more creative, right? And so now it talks about, okay, creative solution is make the breakfast the center of a story. So instead of bringing a book, make the story about breakfast, and eating is a way to reveal, each bite is a way to turn the page on the story. So that's a cool idea. I wouldn't have thought of it myself, but the LLM thought of it. And so, that playing with that just in Claude became the seed for an idea of a little app that I vibe coded with Cove then, where anybody can use this tool, put in a problem, hit shuffle, and it'll kind of do a roulette wheel thing to find one of the oblique strategies, and then it'll output an answer. And so, you know, it seems a little bit frivolous, what I just described, but it actually ended up yielding some interesting insights for Cove, because when we talk about generating momentum in Cove, we have, I thought I had a screenshot of it, but basically at the bottom of each card in Cove, it shows little green links for like what are different ways you can branch off next. And we have a couple different endpoints that are driven by a couple different prompts. One which thinks in a more tactical way, and you know, and the prompt says your job is to refine or build on the ideas that are currently in there. And then another one that thinks in a more strategic or holistic way. And so these are two prompts that really play totally different roles in the user's workspace. And you can think of them as like the two coaches on opposite shoulders for the user, pushing in different directions. And this is a really interesting way to generate momentum, because you have this like creative conflict between these two different roles, both being played by AI. Okay, so I just like threw a bunch of wacky stuff at you that I experimented on Claude. So what? So that's what I have to say about process, right? Like you can learn a lot of stuff about the capabilities of LLMs just by playing around in Claude. And you know, this is important because with every new technology or new material, it takes designers some time to figure out what the material can do, right? So the first molded plywood chairs looked exactly like the kind of Victorian chairs that came before it. It took a while for people to kind of figure out what are the limits of the material. And same thing with architecture, right? Like the first steel buildings with curtain walls still look pretty similar to the masonry buildings that came before them. We're just a little bit stronger with thinner walls. And then, you know, eventually people figure out, no, this unlocks completely new creative possibilities. And this applies to technology too, like our first mobile phones. It took a while for both design and technology to catch up to say like, okay, this is the correct user interface for this new technology. So with that kind of historical context, what's going to come next after the chat box, right? So we have this technology, we have the user interface, we have a certain set of user interface primitives that we're all familiar with. But is that truly the right way to deliver the new set of capabilities to people? And this was in many ways the nagging question that was on my mind when I started Cove 2 years ago. And we had a picture, actually, Stephen and I. So Stephen's my co-founder. He's in the front row here. This, I don't remember where we first stumbled across it, but there's a picture of John Lennon and Paul McCartney at the piano, just like jamming, working on a new song, right? And kind of had the thought, like, what if AI could be like this for everybody? What if AI could be the Paul to your John, John to your Paul, whichever. And you had that kind of creative partnership on tap 24/7. Like, what kind of amazing human potential could be unlocked? And so, you know, like I said, we all know about the primitives we have today. So there's chat boxes. We have things like artifacts, which clearly is becoming part of the toolkit of standard, you know, AI primitives. You know, maybe in Cursor, you can mention one doc when you're in another doc. There's a certain kit of parts that we've got, but there's also some stuff that's missing clearly. And how do we get from here to there? Like, how do we get from the set of primitives we all know and love to like AI as a true creative partner for people that they can work with seamlessly? So I could just like end the talk there and be like, that's for you all to figure out, but that would be kind of a cop out. So I'm going to try to make some hypotheses here based on the last couple of years building Cove. So I have kind of six hypotheses I'll throw out here, and you can try them on for size. And I'd love to hear if you all have other ones to add to the list. So one insight is that whenever humans work on long-term projects, they tend to have a certain shape. You know, sometimes this is called design thinking. I feel like the phrases become pretty overloaded, but basically you diverge and you converge. You collect a bunch of ideas, then you prune or narrow things down. And if you look at the tools we have today, like ChatGPT or Claude, in theory, you can go back and revisit an old thread and prune some of the ideas or build on them. But in practice, like nobody does that. It's so awkward to do. Like, like I can't even remember the last time I went back and like scrolled down to revisit an old thread and like build on it, right? So the tools we have today are terrible at supporting this sort of iterative, divergent thinking. And you can kind of do it in projects, right? In projects in Claude and ChatGPT, but even then, it requires a fair amount of housekeeping to make sure that the project is in like correct state, right? That it's doesn't have stale information in it. So I'm going to show a little video. This is Cove, the product that this is a version of the product we launched last year. And it is a multiplayer canvas where you can work together with AI. And so if I'm wanting to find activities in Yosemite, I can kind of collect a bunch of ideas with the help of AI. And then you can also sort of vibe code these little apps. So if you are learning about, astronomy or physics, it will create little simulation on the idea that sometimes the best type of content for a particular topic is not text or images, it's code, right? It's an interactive experience. And then you can also kind of dispatch little AI agents that will fill in data for you. So this was an attempt, there's a few things going on here. One is better support of nonlinear thinking. Another one is context is explicit, right? Everything on your canvas is context. That also means you can very easily remove things from context. So if you decide you don't like a path anymore, you exit out. And so if I were to try to boil down a couple of lessons from Cove here into a more kind of reusable format, I would say one is about creating visible frameworks for problem solving, right? So one thing that's kind of, I used to interview a lot of PMs, and when you say to a PM, when you're interviewing, you say like, hey, help me break down a solution to this problem, right? You really look for somebody who has a framework for their thinking, who puts on the whiteboard, okay, here's our goals, here's non-goals, here's who we're looking at, like, here's, and you're gonna fill up that whiteboard, and then you're gonna cross some things out or erase some things. But like, it's incredibly helpful for our human brains to have sort of a visual of like, this is the journey we're going to follow. These are the things that are under consideration. Again, this is one of those things that LLMs are terrible at, right? So I think so this is kind of number one on my list of hypotheses of what primitives we're missing in order for turning LLMs into true creative partners. Is a really good creative partner doesn't just respond, it actually provides frameworks for the problem that you're solving together. I think there's some glimmers of this, like Claude Code. Claude Code is one of my favorite products. You should definitely all play with it if you haven't yet. There's a because it's just a command line tool. I think it flies under the radar, and people misunderstand the amount of depth there is there. But it does some really interesting things, right? So it will actually create plans. I think Cursor has a plan mode now that's kind of similar. It will create a plan, it will execute on it for you, but it's already given you sort of the framework. Okay, number two, multiplayer. And I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say like multiplayer and multi-threaded have to go hand in hand. If you just throw multiplayer into ChatGPT, it would be chaos because everybody's trying to talk to the AI at the same time. You don't know whether you're talking to the AI or humans talking to humans. And it would be kind of like imagine, I don't know if you all use Slack here. Yeah. So like imagine trying to run a business on WhatsApp instead of Slack, right? It'd be impossible, right? Like everything gets collapsed into the single thread. And so I think the same thing happens with AI where it, if you really want multiple people working on the same project in the same problem space, you kind of need to be able to have threads where people can work separately on things and then they can converge. Okay, momentum builders. This is the screenshot I was alluding to earlier. So how do I, what can this tool do for me next? How do I make progress toward my goal? This is where some of those prompts of like strategist versus tactician, oblique strategies come in. So, in Cove, at the bottom of every piece of content, it's saying, let's say I'm summarizing my customer reviews for my business here. I could either go deeper, right? You can think of this first suggestion as the tactical suggestion of, okay, I've got this row, but I could add an extra column to have more details, or I could go wider, which is, okay, what does this set of data indicate about my customer journeys? And I think Manus, if people have used it, I definitely recommend playing around with Manus. It's they do a good job with this too. So in some ways, their chat looks a lot like kind of ChatGPT or Claude, but it does a nice job. Kind of this was a thread I had about trying to assess like a value of some real estate, and it had some interesting suggestions of like, okay, what's the next step here? Okay. This one is interesting because it's not really a missing artifact, because we all know it really, really well. But from browsers, there's a certain set of primitives that have become almost muscle memory, right? So having links, being able to command click on those links, opening new tabs. This is the way that we support nonlinear thinking and multi-threadedness in browsers, and it's all second nature to us now. But it wasn't, if you remember, it wasn't always there, right? The earliest web browsers did not have tabs. You couldn't command click on a link, or maybe you could, but it would open a new window. I forget. But like Firefox introduced tabs, right? It was a big deal at the time. So we have all these, but we can't. But now all of a sudden, as soon as you're in AI land, everything gets dumber, and you don't have access to these things anymore, right? And so, what would it look like if we kind of leaned into some of these familiar browser primitives? So this is a prototype of a new version of Cove that we have, where Cove can create articles, and then it'll instrument that article with links, and I can click on it, and it opens that link in a new tab. And then the thing that is created in the new tab, that was short, so I'll just hit it again. And then the thing that it opens in the new tab is actually generated using the context of the previous tab. So it's like an article specifically about like, go deeper on this thing in the context of that other thing. And it's also a really nice way, we all are familiar with, you're in Google News or whatever, and you want to read about a bunch of things. And so you command click, 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 click on a bunch of headlines. And then the headlines go really, the pages load really slowly because they have to hit a bunch of ad servers and whatnot. But it's a really nice way to hide latency that, again, we all are used to as muscle memory. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities just to apply these familiar web browser primitives to this new domain. Okay. One other thing, which is not quite a primitive, but I think it's important, and so I wanted to include it, is model conscious users. So if you'd asked me like 2 years ago, if like the average person on the street would have opinions about like GPT versus Claude and what their personalities are like, I would have said that's totally insane. Like wearing my designer hat, I would be like, no, that's just an implementation detail. All that stuff should be abstracted away from the users. They shouldn't have to care about the model that's underneath the product. And I think I've made a total 180 on that. Like it's really fascinating if you look at anybody who spends even a little bit of time with AI starts to develop opinions about which personality like better. And I think this is here to stay. Like, I think this idea is not just a temporary thing. I think people are actually going to get more sophisticated about the Coke versus Pepsi, or what are the ingredients of the things that they're buying? What are the models that are in there? So, I would encourage you to think about, is there, and it's also just from a confidence building point of view, right? Like, we haven't done this in Cove yet, but everybody the first thing they see, they want to know like what model's under this, like what, you know, is this Claude or what is this thing, right? I think consumers are just going to get more sophisticated there. And of course, you see this in like the whole, you know, challenges that ChatGPT has had. I think they had their designer hats on in the same way. They were trying to abstract away model picking from the users, and they, you know, they ran into problems because people were really upset when they took away their friend 4.0, right? Okay, and then the last kind of primitive I want to propose is what I would call like throwaway tools. So actually, I'll do a little audience interactive portion here. Can anyone name these 3 tools? Anyone know what any of them are? Grapefruit knife. Okay, nice one, Zach. What's the second one? Anyone know? It's a coconut opener. Okay. And then the third one I just threw in there to throw you off. This is totally made up. But I mean, isn't that weird that there's like a tool just for opening coconuts, right? So I think AI has a potential to give our users the exact right tool for the job. And maybe that's a job they will never, ever do again, right? Maybe you only need that coconut opener once in your entire life, but when you need it, you really, really need it. And so, you know, this is a little kind of example of, let's say I am trying to figure out how hiring more staff is going to impact the, you know, metrics of my dog grooming business, right? That's a particular simulation. It's actually pretty complex, right? I mean, probably, you know, people have done like, you know, PhDs about this type of thing. But if I have that, when I need that tool, maybe I don't even know exactly the tool I need in that moment, but that could be a game changer for me, right? And so we've done a lot of work on this in Cove of like, how do we generate exactly the right tool for the moment? And here's an example. This is, I used to work at Uber. And so this is an example where, let's say I'm on the Uber ops team and I have a bunch of data and I really need a map to understand how surge correlates with location. So I can say, hey, take this data and show it to me on a map with the circles color coded by surge. And it'll like design a perfect map for me. But if I want a map of hiking trails in Yosemite, it's going to design a completely different map for me. It's like 3D, right? And so this is one of the things we can do in Cove now. And let me fast forward a bit, actually. And yeah, this is also kind of real time. So the map is actually, if I delete a bunch of rows from the data, the map will adapt. And then this is another kind of simulation example where, let's say I'm trying to make a decision in my job about if I were to cap surge, how is it going to affect wait time in different parts of the city, right? And so it can actually create a little simulation app. It can kind of define some assumptions and create a little simulation app right there. And so when you look at something like this, I mean, I think this has a potential to really replace like a huge swath of the use cases people currently use spreadsheets for, or try to use spreadsheets for, right? Okay, so to recap, you know, I talked about kind of the how, like how do you work with LLMs? How can you explore using a chat box? And what are some of the techniques you can use to kind of like learn more, test the limits of the capabilities of LLMs, and don't wait for engineers to tell you what you can do with them. Figure it out yourself, right? And then I sort of shared some hypotheses of what are the missing primitives that are going to be important to the future of AI interactions for people. And yeah, hopefully this gives you some food for thought. Would love to hear if other folks have things to add to this list based on your experience. But thanks. I'll pause there or I'll stop there, and would love to hear any questions. Thank you. Or jokes. Kids' jokes are good too.
You mentioned that you really, really like Cloud Code.
I like what? Cloud Code, yes.
Yeah. Are there any tools that you don't like and why?
Tools I do not like.
Yeah,
Okay,
something
so
you
question
tried
was,
and you was like, this is disgusting.
oh, that's a great question. Tools I don't like. I don't know. I'll have to think about that. That's a good one. Are there any tools you don't like?
Oh my God, a lot. Tools I don't like. Okay. I'm full of people. This is the room full of people. I hate Figma Make.
Yeah.
It makes me suffer every time I'm trying to design something, and I actually using different tools instead of Figma Make to achieve the same goal.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brad. Figma Make, the worst.
The worst. Yes. No, I agree. It's an interesting one. I've only tried to use it a couple of times and I gave up. I'm not really sure why. There's something weird about the combination of WYSIWYG and then like, I don't know. I'd much rather use Claude Code or Lovable or something else to prototype. Yeah. Okay.
My question is, oh, wow. Okay. My question is less about AI, but actually, I just wanted to say that like one thing I was like very deeply inspired by was just like how important play is in the way you approach AI. And that's something that I've been wanting to incorporate more into my work, but it can be really hard to prioritize this, but especially when you're working on like enterprise software where you're like just trying to get something done and not thinking about play. But I really miss play and I love how you bring that into the way you explore tools. I guess my question, especially since you're in a startup that like focuses on this and I feel like you're really intentional about play, is how do you structure or bring play to make sure that that's something that's like infused in your work culture as you guys are building this like tool? Because I feel like you might have some really great ideas. Yeah, just curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I think like just not being worried about doing something really dumb, I guess, is an important part of it, right? Like trust and being like, hey, here's a really wacky demo and I have no idea if it's useful, but I thought it was kind of interesting. Just, I don't know, normalizing that, I guess, is important. I think also on your point about enterprise software, I mean, one thing that's so cool about like what you all do is you're sitting on crazy amounts of data. And so like, I don't know, I just think there's something like fun about like throw a bunch of data into the LLM and see what it comes up with, right? Like, if you were to, I don't know, like give it a bunch of data and then say like, if this data was a spirit animal, what would it be? Or like, like if you turned this, if you turned the results of this SQL query into like a nursery rhyme, like, like what would that look like, right? It's like, it's very easy. Like LLMs are so good at taking arbitrary thing and translating it into arbitrary format. And I think like humans are so good at digesting narratives and so bad at digesting data that there's like a ton of really interesting possibilities there. So that's what I would want to play with if if I were you.
Thanks for the idea.
That was great. Thanks for sharing. I was just curious, you've obviously played with the LLMs a lot, like probably definitely more than I have. Not to mention founding an AI company, but what are some of the biggest limitations of LLMs that you've discovered, and maybe any less notable ones that we haven't heard of?
I mostly use the same models as everyone else, so I don't know if I have any secret models to tell you about. But in terms of limitations, I mean, I think one interesting constraint is latency. Just that I didn't talk about it here, but I probably should have somewhere, is just like part of the play is figuring out not only what can it do, but how fast can it do it, right? And so playing with learning the differences between what can the dumb models do and what can the smart models do is kind of like fun sometimes. In terms of limitations, I mean, I think it's still like, I mean, there's like, it's not a substitute for human judgment, right? So I think what it can do is it can like provide possibilities. It can create possibilities. And I think if you're in a world where you have to get it exactly right every single time, um, like I actually, in some ways, I kind of like have some empathy for folks that are designing Claude or ChatGPT or whatever, because the form factor that they deliver answers in doesn't allow for a lot of range, right? It's like ask a question and you need to get the answer exactly right. It's not a very forgiving format. And so I think when you constrain yourself that way, the model's limitations and hallucination issues tend to show a lot more. Versus if you say, hey, here's a prompt, give me 30 possible answers to this prompt, right? I was playing around with this the other day. I think about this, I'll go on a little detour here because I think it might be interesting. One thing that I think is an underrated power that we have as designers is to be the guardian of a team's vocabulary. So people who work with me at Uber have probably like heard me like drone on about this before, but like, you know, coming up with the right, I believe that as a team, we can't talk about an issue and solve it until we have the right words to talk about it, right? And so I spend like one of the things that I'll do just for fun is like I have this like problem that I need to describe to my team, but I don't have the right metaphor for it. You know, I think maybe something to do with lifeboats, but I can't quite get it right, you know? And if I tell Claude, hey, give me the correct metaphor for this, it's going to come up with something terrible. But if I say, give me like 50 ideas for like things that could be a good metaphor for this and just go crazy, don't limit yourself. Like, you know, almost always there's going to be 3 or 4 out of those 50 where I'm like, oh, this is really solid. Right. So I think like, that's something to lean into. But when you constrain LLMs and say you have to come up with one exactly right answer, it's you're going to be less happy with it.
You should share your lifeboat analogy.
Oh, lifeboat. Yeah. Steven says I need to share my lifeboat analogy. I think about, oh, I have to remember. So basically we have, so especially earlier on in the early days of Cove, we had this one really gnarly monolithic prompt that like did everything in the product. And it was like, it was built on Claude. And basically we would tell this prompt, hey, the user just typed this into chat, figure out what the heck to do. And you have these like 12 tools you can call. You can search the web, you can modify something in the workspace, you can create a new card, you can create an app, yada, 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 yada. And so these 12 tools were like 12 passengers in a lifeboat. And it was like just barely staying afloat. And then we would add a 13th tool and like it would start taking on water. Like the quality just across the board would get worse. And like you couldn't really understand why. And I guess this is a good answer to the limitations of LLMs question thing too, is like when you're asking an LLM to make too many judgments at once, it will start to fail, but you'll never exactly know why. And it'll fail in unpredictable ways. And that's what I call the lifeboat problem. It's just like, you're just making it do too much and the boat's starting to sink. You got to figure out one of these tools to throw overboard. Maybe it doesn't even matter which one. You just need like less stuff for it to tool, or you need to break it into multiple prompts where first it makes a decision of what, you know, what bucket of tools to use. And then within that bucket, there's a separate prompt that, you know, chooses exactly what to do, right? Is it the needs more context tool or needs to manipulate something tool? And like, you know, fewer, bigger tools and then defer some of the other decision making. That's my life story.
Thank you for the inspiring talk. I was really intrigued by the picture of John and Paul jamming together. And I was curious if you've ever kind of felt a glimpse of that feeling using any tools so far. And if we like, you know, in the future address all these missing primitives and reach that point of really being able to jam with AI, what would you like to do, like a project or idea? Like maybe it's hard to imagine what's possible yet, but is there something that you would be dying to try?
My dream project is actually starting a school that's all about like AI, like, you know, building the perfect AI educational buddy for kids. I don't think we're that far off from it being possible, but that's my like crazy But no, I think that glimmer is there it's there all over. I mean, like the little oblique strategies thing that came up with the idea of the breakfast story. Like I didn't actually try it. I guess I should, um, but like that was like, wow, I wouldn't have come up with that. Like I feel like AI is really possible of coming up with original creative thought, almost as well as humans, as long as you give it the right context and the right framework.
Thank you.
People on the Zoom, feel free to chime in too.
Regarding form factors, I'm really curious, in your opinion, do you see LLMs evolving to a form factor that is beyond screens?
Well, beyond suggests that there's not going to be on screens anymore. Like, I think they're definitely going to still be on screens, right? I saw an interesting comment on Twitter the other day, which is that maybe the ultimate, people are a lot faster at talking than typing, but they're a lot faster at reading than listening. And so maybe in the future, it's gonna all be talk and then read, talk and then read. Like we're all only gonna output using our mouths and then do input using our eyes, which is kind of a weird idea, but it kind of makes sense. I don't know, maybe that's what the future looks like. I think people really love, I'm not like a big podcast person, but people just lost it when like Google Notebook LLM introduced their whole like generative podcast feature. People loved that, right? I thought that was very interesting. There's something about things feeling more human via voice, and you can deliver content with more of an emotional dimension to it. So that was interesting. Yeah.
Thank you.
Podcast?
Oh, yeah. So I'm talking about Notebook LM. So they have a feature where you can put in a topic of your choice. Like my kid wanted to learn about plane crashes. So he's very edgy that way. But you know, you can put it in and like create give me a podcast about the physics of plane crashes and why jet engine stalls happen or whatever, and it'll generate like a 10-minute generated audio podcast for you. So it's pretty well done.
Yeah, you have access to it. We just got access to it here, so go check it out. It's awesome.
Or you could just like use stuff that you're not allowed to use on your own computer. You don't have to wait
That's
for
not
Zach's.
sanctioned by that's Andy's opinion.
I can say that.
Andy's opinion only. Anyone on Zoom? Any questions on Zoom? Got time for one more? All right, I'll ask the last question then. What was the first thing after you saw that tweet and it kind of got your mind going of like, oh, LMs, the new material? What was the first thing that you built that were really like, oh wow, this is like it kind of you got that light bulb of this is real and this can be something really amazing?
Well, that's a tough one because I think the first several things I built, like in retrospect, were really dumb, even though I was excited about them at the time. I think Stephen and I spent a long time working on AI travel planning. That was the first thing that I really went deep on, and we were thinking about doing a startup on that, and just didn't quite have the conviction level. And then Cove kind of came along as an idea. But I think what was interesting about that process was I was trying to figure out, that was based on a hypothesis that like people really want a product that looks like a conventional UI with a bunch of really smart AI stuff going on behind the scenes. And so it would be emailing hotel, event managers to do group bookings on your behalf, and the AI would be generating the emails and then interpreting the emails and coding it, and it would all be behind the scenes with a nice glossy UI on top of it. And I think the learning from that is like it's tough to build any product where the user model there's too big of a gap between the user model and the system model underneath, right? Like I think one thing I've realized I really value about products is that the thing that you're interacting with is an honest representation of the primitives that are going on behind the scenes. Because I think it's just inevitable whenever that's not the case, you're going to end up with these weird, gaps that you need to paper over and these weird surprises, right? like Google Calendar is an example, like a bad example of this, which is like, recurring events in Google Calendar, that's like an important primitive, but it's completely hidden. It looks exactly like a series of regular events. And when you start deleting things in a series, you get really weird, unpredictable behavior. And then suddenly I edit an event, but I've moved it from its normal series, and I don't know whether that is going to apply to the recurring event or all the, it's like, this is a good example of like that deviation, right? So I think build products. So I think my philosophy right now is much more build products that are honest about the technology that's underneath them, or you can feel it the right amount. It's a long answer, but I think it's an interesting one.
Awesome. Thank you, Andy,
All right.
everyone.
Thanks a lot.